Jane did her best to put the phone away. The recorder was still on. The stranger grabbed her hair sharply. The girl screamed in such unexpected pain. He grabbed and dragged her so hard that Jane fell to the floor. As she fell, Jane managed to hold onto her cell phone and it fell, rolling under the couch. Fortunately, the recorder didn't turn off and continued to record everything that could be heard in that room. "Don't touch me! Let go!" screamed the girl desperately, but the intruder continued to drag her already by the leg across the floor. Screaming wildly, Jane begged for help. God, what did this masked villain want with her? He covered her mouth with his hand, roughly ordering her to shut up immediately. Jane became very frightened. She tried to scream, even with her mouth closed. The enraged man yelled for her to finally shut up. Holding Jane by the hair, tried to pin her to the floor. He did it so quickly and sharply that the girl was unable to dodge and hit her head on the stool. It looked like Jane might soon lose consciousness. A blood stain was slowly spreading at her temple. Mentally, she was already saying goodbye to her life. However, for now, she was still aware of everything that was happening. The intruder laid Jane face down, one hand clasping her hands behind her back, the other pinning her head to the floor. In this position, the girl was able to spot her cell phone lying under the couch. The masked man promised to let Jane go, but only if she didn't scream. He asked if the girl understood what was required of her. Jane mumbled inaudibly and nodded, signaling that she agreed to his request. After that, he finally let her go, removing his hand from the girl's head. She was in a panic. "Take whatever you want, just don't touch me, I beg you. Money, credit cards, I'll give you everything," Jane begged dazedly. "Where is she?" was all the bandit asked. The girl asked again, explaining that she had no idea what he was talking about. The stranger irritably repeated his question. However, Jane replied that she really couldn't understand what he wanted and asked him to let her go. "Shut up, I know you're looking for this," he hissed as he roughly pulled the girl's head upwards, grabbing it right by the hair. Jane cried out in pain. She remained silent as the stranger continued to hold her without loosening his grip. "Do you take me for a fool?" he asked angrily, lifting the girl with one hand as if she were a fluff ball. God, it looked like he was about to hit her. The stranger raised his fist to strike. Fortunately, at that moment, someone called him. He tossed Jane aside and reached into his pocket for his phone, ordering the girl to be quiet. He picked up the phone and reported to someone that so far he had no luck finding anything. Apparently, his caller was asking about Jane, and the stranger replied that she had returned earlier than expected. He also assured her that he had everything under control. Jane mentally went through every possible scenario of who her cruel intruder could be. She would also be interested to know who he was talking to on the phone right now. Well, his conversation didn't last long. He hung up quickly, dropping the call. "Luck is on your side today," he said, picking up a framed photo of Jane with her friend Emily. He then shoved that photo right in Jane's face, instructing her not to poke her nose anywhere, and especially not in the affairs of the deceased. Jane stared dumbfounded at the photo. It showed her Emily smiling cheerfully. The stranger threatened that if Jane disobeyed, she had a good chance of ending up just like her friend. After that, he suddenly and sharply struck Jane with his fist with a swing. This time, the girl lost consciousness. Someone's insistent, loud knocking on the door made Jane finally wake up. Someone was trying to call Jane from outside. The girl slowly began to come to her senses, wondering who it could have been. However, she didn't have the strength to stand up and snatch it away. It was Ryan's guard. Without waiting for a response from the girl, he suspected something wrong and opened the front door with a powerful kick from his foot. "Miss Jane," he said anxiously as he looked at Jane. The girl was lying helplessly on the floor near the couch. The guard gently picked the girl up and carried her to the couch. He was concerned as to what had happened. Jane was moaning with a headache. The man asked if she had hit something. The girl explained that someone had broken into her house and was looking for something just as she returned. The man was very perturbed by such news. He asked if Jane remembered what the intruder looked like. Jane felt very dizzy. The girl wondered why the guard had come here. He replied that Mr. Ryan Howe had a bad feeling and ordered to visit Jane and check the situation. Oh, did he really realize that Jane had called him? Oh, suddenly she remembered her cell phone, which had fallen out of her possession in the fall. The girl darted under the couch in lightning speed in search of her missing item. The security guard puzzledly inquired what she was doing. Jane pulled out her phone. The recording was still on. How lucky that creep at least didn't notice her phone. "Even though I don't remember what he looks like, his voice is clearly recorded," Jane declared jubilantly. 5 minutes later, they were already talking to the police officers. The police officers asked the usual questions, like whether the girl had had an argument with anyone recently. Jane tried to tell in detail everything she remembered, without leaving out any details. After hearing the girl's statement, the police officers promised to find Jane's attacker soon. However, they emphasized that for her safety, in the meantime, it would be better for Jane to stay with her friends for a while. "Shall I take you to them?" the cop offered, pointing his finger at Emily's photo. Jane declined. At the same time, Ryan had just called the security guard. He was yelling at him on the phone, rebuking him for telling him to go to her faster. Why is she still hurt? Ryan told him to get Jane to him immediately. The man spoke so loudly. It seemed like everyone could hear his voice in the phone receiver. "Miss Jane, Mr. Ryan Howe said to take you to his house immediately." The guard repeated his boss's orders to Jane. "Of course," the girl agreed with a smile. Meanwhile, back at Ryan Howe's house, there was silence everywhere. The house was so quiet that you could barely think there was anyone in it at the moment. And yet, Ryan was home. He sat and peered anxiously at the door. He was really worried about why Jane hadn't shown up yet. Had something else happened? He was worried about how serious the wound on the girl's forehead was. After all, if it left a scar, it would be bad. He noted to himself that the changes he had made had left no trace, and he could touch up her face if necessary. At these thoughts, he sneezed loudly. Right. Once Jane arrived, he should examine her thoroughly. Finally, the doorbell rang. Ryan jumped up and, heading for the door, invited entry. Barely had the door opened before Ryan immediately said the girl's name loudly. The guard was curious as to why Mr. Ryan was sitting here. Paying no attention to the question, Ryan Howe began to ask Jane why she had only come in now. He hurriedly asked how her head was and if the girl had any other injuries. Then, he asked the girl to show him her injuries. Jane smilingly assured Ryan that she was fine. Devil Ryan Howe had to make sure her words were true, so he asked her again. The girl's answer was the same. "So what are you standing there for? Come on in," he invited. Jane was curious as to why the bodyguard didn't enter with her. Ryan asked her to ignore it, saying that he would be here in 5 minutes if necessary. He asked ironically, "Did the devil need people's protection?" "Surely this is your home," Jane agreed, looking at the huge portrait of Ryan Howe that hung on the wall. The devil approached the girl and informed her that she would be sleeping in the living room tonight. And since there was a picture of him on the wall, she wouldn't have to be afraid at night, as he would be there for her. Jane thought it would be better for her to go home after all. Devil Ryan Howe mused aloud that he could still read her mind. There was no way Jane was getting used to that. Calling out to the girl, Ryan tossed her something and informed her that the bathroom was at the end of the second floor. He suggested that Jane take a hot shower to relax a bit. The girl considered what he threw her. It was a set of clothes. Wow, he prepared this too, she thought. "Don't be so sensitive," the devil said. How many times could he read her mind already? Jane walked into the bathroom. A hot shower was really coming in handy right now. The steam from the hot water with just one sizzling sound was already relaxing the girl. Jane became under the stream of jets and succumbed to the relaxing relaxation. Together with the water, the tension in the body was leaving. However, Jane's thoughts were still preoccupied with the recent incident. She remembered the violent intruder, his sudden appearance and inexplicable aggression. Jane was particularly disturbed by the questions he had asked her. What or who was he looking for like that? I wonder why the stranger had asked her not to dig into her dead friend Emily's past. Bathing, Jane couldn't take her mind off the intrusive thoughts. Had Emily been just as frightened? To know how long her unfortunate friend had lived in fear? A shiver swept over Jane. Despite the temperature of the water, she was shivering all over. "Jane, are you okay?" Ryan inquired from outside the bathroom door. He threatened Jane to throw away all the food if she didn't come out. The girl calmed him down by telling him she was on her way out. Devil Ryan Howe mentally decided that he would definitely never forgive those who had done this to Jane. Ryan turned on the television. Yes, it would be worth watching the news for a while. Suddenly, he turned around abruptly and looked up. "Did you want something?" he asked. Standing on the stairs was Jane. She was wearing the very pajamas that Ryan had made for her. Devil asked the girl why she was here. After all, he had told her to go to bed. Jane answered that she couldn't sleep for some reason. She sat down next to the man, wrapped her arms around her knees, and said that she couldn't sleep here. Ryan looked at her puzzled. He offered to turn off the lights, but Jane asked to leave the lights on. Jane suddenly lay down right next to the devil Ryan Howe and addressed him by name. The girl admitted that when the masked type had attacked her, she had shouted the devil's name in her heart. "I heard that," Ryan replied quietly. "Next time, make sure you show up on time, okay?" Jane asked the man. He looked at the girl, hesitating for a second. "I promise. Go ahead and sleep," Ryan replied and carefully covered the girl with a blanket. Jane asked, making sure he didn't trick her. Devil Ryan Howe swore in the devil's name that he wouldn't deceive Jane. Exhausted by today's events, the girl wrapped herself up with her head in the blanket and fell soundly asleep. Ryan waited until her sleep was deep enough and quietly rose from the couch. Tiptoeing so as not to wake her, he slowly backed away. Then he turned back around and squatted right in front of the couch, staring at the sleeping Jane. This girl is so weird. She can sleep soundly next to the devil. "Not afraid of me at all," he whispered, lightly touching Jane's cheek with his finger. Giving her a sad look, Ryan added, "After all, I am the devil who will later take her life." Devil Ryan knew from personal experience how in the face of death, people try to break their contract with him. Almost all of them ask for a little more time, believing they have the right to command the devil. Some of them believe that they can pay with money for breaking the contract and promise to give fabulous sums for it. They assure that they will not hide or run anywhere. Yes, all these situations with different people have been repeated time after time for thousands of years. The devil has been accused and begged and even scared by God himself. However, no matter what happens afterwards, the end is the same. There always comes that time when you have to fulfill your promise. The devil always keeps his promises, so he felt entitled to demand the same from those who made promises to him. However, there were always many who only wanted to take without thinking of the hour when it would be necessary to give. "Jane, how you will appear before you die," thought the devil, removing his hand from her face. "Jane, little Jane, who is it that is calling for Jane? Where are these voices coming from?" A naked Emily sits with her head tucked into her knees in the middle of a viscous void. What is this place? And what is Emily doing here? Why is she calling for Jane? God, what has this suddenly started to happen? A multitude of human hands reached for Emily's body out of nowhere. They were all reaching for Emily, trying to grab her and drag her away. The girl was screaming desperately, calling for help. Jane didn't realize what was happening. Her eyes reflected horror. She realized that her friend needed help. Jane tried to run to Emily. However, there were many hands clinging to her legs as well, restricting her movements. Jane noted with horror that she couldn't move. Jane begged to be released, but the hands continued to cling, holding her down and preventing her from approaching her friend. Meanwhile, Emily, with tears in her eyes, was almost drowning in the endless array of hands. "Oh no, don't go, Emily," Emily sobbed and called loudly to her Jane for help. Just then, Jane was startled awake in a cold sweat. The girl shrieked, "God, what a nightmare dream," as if everything was happening in reality. "It's just a dream," Jane tried to calm herself. She sat on the bed and tried to come to her senses. Jane mentally apologized to Emily for not making it again. Right across from the couch where Jane was sleeping sat the devil. It looked like he was sleeping. Jane noted that his horns had grown back. The devil Ryan Howe must be guarding her. The girl moved closer to the devil and began to scrutinize him. She was grateful to him. In a rush of overwhelming feelings, the girl tried to touch his hair. How cute he is when he sleeps. In his sleep, the devil mumbled something about strawberry candy. He was worried he couldn't fit any more in him. Jane tickled Ryan behind his ear. This action of hers was too risky, but Jane seemed to have gotten away with it this time. The girl looked at the devil and wondered. How strange. He is a devil after all, but Jane wasn't afraid of him at all. With these thoughts, the girl took a blanket and covered Ryan Howe with it. Yes, sometimes it seemed to Jane that people were the ones to be afraid of. Perhaps she was right to a certain extent. Looking around, the girl noted that the devil, who had lived more than 1,000 years, had furnished the house with modern appliances. His furnishings were the envy of any modern man. There were shelves of all sorts of things on one wall. Jane sighed disappointedly, noting that she had expected to see a lot of relics from different eras. However, there was nothing even close to that. Among the books on one of the shelves, one of them caught the girl's attention. On it was the title, Photo Album, Book of the Devil. What a find! Jane, humming happily to herself, reached for the book. In anticipation, the girl opened the book with interest. On the first page was a photo of a young and handsome blonde man. Wow, was it really him? The same devil she was already familiar with, but in a different guise? The other photo was of a different year, and it showed a different man, at a more mature age. It was still the same devil. In yet another photo, he was already in the form of a woman. This picture is so cool. It's not fair to turn myself into such a hottie. In another photo, there was a baby. Jane mentally noted that in the form of a child, the devil looked quite clever. Oh, how cute he was. On one of the pages of the album, the girl stopped. She seemed to be surprised by something. What happened? On the page where Jane stopped, there was a picture of the devil in the form she knew him now. And Jane was very concerned about one question. Why was he alone all the time? Ryan Howe's unexpected voice sounded behind the girl's back. "These photos are of His Majesty the Devil, that is me. I can change my appearance, good, say." Jane slammed the album shut and said angrily, "Nope, not even a little bit." The girl put the album back on the shelf and thoughtfully called out to the devil. Jane turned to the devil and, looking him straight in the eye with a serious voice, asked, "Ryan Howe, are you the only devil in the world?" The devil was outraged by such a question. He began to wail, "What kind of questions are these? Am I not enough for you alone? Do you need someone else? Windy human woman." Jane covered her ears and replied that she was just worried about his own. The devil ran after Jane in feigned anger. The rumbling of his stomach could be clearly heard, and the fact that he suddenly started hiccuping. Jane wondered if he was hungry and offered to cook something. Devil Ryan Howe asked indignantly on the run. Didn't he say something about only being able to eat? Jane didn't let him finish his sentence. "You can only eat sweets." She finished the sentence in his place. She then offered to fulfill his cherished wish. Heading with the devil towards the exit, Jane informed him that she had just realized that the candy store she worked at was right in his house. And even though it was after hours, she could go into the kitchen and make him something sweet. Standing at the door, Jane suddenly remembered that her and the devil's first meeting had taken place in this very pastry shop. Yes, they'd also been photographed by Ryan Howe fans. Strange coincidence, isn't it? Jane suddenly thought, is it definitely a coincidence? The devil scratched the back of his head with a silly expression. "Eh? You say the pastry shop is in my house? I think it's mine." Ah yes, it's worth reminding that the devil is obscenely rich and owns more than one business. "What do you mean, it seems?" the girl asked, perplexed. She was sharply reluctant to go anywhere else after this news. Night was falling in the city. A huge moon was showing in the sky. Ah, what a marvelous full moon. Devil and Jane entered the candy shop. While the girl was tying her apron, the devil Ryan Howe wandered around the kitchen and curiously looked at and touched everything. Jane asked that Mr. Devil not pretend like he had never seen a hot shop. Ryan Howe became numb. He angrily reminded Jane that he had already asked her not to call him Mr. Devil. The girl didn't really listen to his words. Fixing her hair, she noticed that it smelled so sweet in here. But it wasn't surprising since the owner had talked about how the service in their candy shop was for special customers. "Turns out you are a special customer," Jane grinned as she looked at the devil. Meanwhile, the devil was already drooling from the incredible aromas he had inhaled in the kitchen and wildly whetted his appetite. The girl wondered if he was really that hungry. Devilishly, Ryan Howe declared that he was all over Jane. After a brief pause, Ryan suddenly asked if Jane regretted that she had decided to give her life for revenge and that she had survived the attack tonight. The girl replied that all people regretted something, and he was no exception. She regretted not stopping her father when he decided to leave home, and for not being more tolerant of her mom back then. But most of all, she regretted not answering Emily's call, leaving her to die alone. "But I don't regret handing my life over to you," Jane added without hesitation. Jane then said it was now her turn to ask a question. The devil looked at the girl expectantly. "Will I meet Emily after I die?" she asked hopefully. After a brief pause, the devil replied that she would meet her friend there. Jane was satisfied with that answer. Only she did not realize that it was a lie, which she herself chose to believe. Meanwhile, dawn was approaching. The sun had not yet risen, but the streets of the city were already beginning to lighten. Devil Ryan Howe was smiling contentedly and stroking his belly. "It's good, isn't it?" Jane inquired. "I'm so hungry I didn't taste it, but if you cook it again—" He didn't get a chance to finish before Jane interrupted him, telling him that she couldn't tonight because she had some things to do. The devil didn't know what she was talking about since it was Saturday. The girl reminded him that today was the day of Emily's funeral. Devil Ryan Howe declared that he would also go with Jane. A security guard who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere suddenly reminded Ryan that he had an all-day commercial shoot today. The devil was so eager to go with Jane that the bodyguard had to literally hold him back by force. Jane tried to convince the devil that it was okay, and she could go by herself and let him go to work. Ryan Howe began to lash out indignantly. He was ready to trade his job for Jane. The bodyguard pointed out that in that case, Ryan would have to make up for the contractual downtime. Ryan Howe didn't mind reimbursement because he had plenty of money. The bodyguard urged him to put some energy into the contract. Then he abruptly opened the van door and shoved Ryan in. It didn't take him much effort. The strong and big as a closet guard did the job super fast. He slammed the door shut just as lightning fast, not even letting Ryan come to his senses. "Bye," Jane said goodbye quietly, though Ryan hardly heard her words. Devil Ryan Howe stared out the side window of the car with his cheek pressed against the glass. It looked quite amusing. "Try to get some work done," the girl said quietly, turning her gaze away from him. Jane handed the guard a box of cake and asked him to let Ryan eat when he got tired, if it was okay with him. The guard, of course, agreed. Devil pounded his fist on the glass indignantly. He shouted that he wouldn't let the cake that was made for him be brought in so that he still had to share with others. However, no one heard his outrage. Jane looked sadly after the departing van. She would have to go alone. The funeral parlor. Jane approached the right place. A sign that read, "Emily's friend, please get in line," caught her attention. The girl entered the room where her friend could be honored. There, Emily's grandmother was already sitting in a chair. Jane had anticipated this moment. The grandmother raised her head and addressed the girl who entered. "Have you come, Jane? Come to me." Jane pressed her lips together. She could hardly restrain herself from crying at once during the first few seconds of her stay here. Within moments, however, she was already sobbing, resting her head in her grandmother's lap. Jane said she was sorry. The old woman stroked Jane's head. She tried to comfort the girl, telling her that she had to be strong. Because grandmother knew nothing about Emily killing herself. Everyone lied to her in good faith. Meanwhile, Emily's grandmother was urging Jane not to cry, for then Emily's soul would not be able to leave in peace. She said to stay calm, and then it would be easier to let her go. "I'd rather let the old woman think that Emily died because her legs suddenly gave out," Jane thought to herself. "See how happy her smile is," Grandma remarked, pointing to Emily's funeral photo. "We can't mourn her," Grandma said with emptiness in her eyes, and Jane silently thought about the fact that still no one could bear the longing of the elderly. "Yes, I don't cry." With these words, Jane wiped away her tears and tried to smile. How hard it was for her to pull that smile on herself. Jane felt so silly right now. It was obvious that the grandmother who was trying to comfort her was much more miserable than Jane. Suddenly, someone called out to Jane. It was Nancy Freeman. She was holding a bouquet of white lilies. Nancy walked over to Emily's picture and laid her bouquet next to it. For a while, Nancy stood by the photo with her head down. Jane just watched the scene in silence. Then Nancy Freeman approached her grandmother to express her condolences. She wished the old lady to brace herself in her grief and asked her to think of her health first. With these words, the girl tried to give her an envelope from their entire team. The grandmother did not want to accept the money, but Jane took the envelope from Nancy's hands and put it into the old lady's hands. Afterward, Jane asked Nancy to have a private word with her. Nancy was alarmed by this request, however. She followed Jane nonetheless. Standing at the window, the head of the finance department offered Jane a cigarette. Jane sternly remarked that she didn't smoke, and Nancy shouldn't smoke here either. Thereupon, Jane asked her to put the cigarette away. Nancy agreed, and obediently put the cigarette away. She inquired why Jane had called her here. Jane asked without further preamble, "You have the memory card from the camera, don't you?" Nancy's eyes went wide. It was clear to Jane that she clearly had something to do with this. This woman, how does she know? Nancy thought excitedly. However, Nancy made an indifferent face and said she didn't know what Jane was talking about or what cameras and memory cards she was referring to. Showing the wound on her forehead, Jane said that she had found the camera in the bathroom yesterday afternoon and that during the night someone had snuck into her house and attacked her. He let me go because he didn't find what he wanted. And you know what he wants, don't you, Chief Nancy? Jane continued. The girl also added that she knew how unexpected this was for Nancy, but she hoped that she would tell Jane everything she knew. Jane could take the memory card for safekeeping, and if Nancy suddenly fears for her safety, she can make sure that no one finds out about it. I just want to know the truth, Jane said, looking Nancy straight in the eye. Nancy wondered what Jane needed to look into this for. Why did she even need all of this? Jane explained that she didn't want another Emily to show up. A sort of pause hung between the girls. Then Nancy turned and walked away, throwing out on the way that she had nothing to say to that. It was bitter to Jane to realize that she alone wanted to get at the truth, that no one in this world cared about other people's grief. They, in Emily's words, who is it? Who was she talking about? Jane asked desperately in the wake of her departing supervisor. She also emphasized that Emily might not have been dying. If Nancy knew the truth, why wouldn't she tell it? Supervisor Nancy Freeman nervously clenched her hand into a fist. Jane called out to Supervisor Nancy a few more times, trying to get through to her conscience, but she didn't turn around, just walked away silently. Colleagues Noah and Lewis, who had come in with Nancy, came out of Emily's funeral parlor. They were talking about smoking. One of them stated that he couldn't help but have a cigarette during the funeral, even though he and his wife were planning to conceive a child. The two men then stood against the wall and began discussing the late Emily. One of them remembered Emily in a kind word, saying that she had been remarkably delicate during her lifetime. He regretted that he had not spoken more warm words to her during her lifetime. It was only now that they were beginning to realize how considerate Emily had been to everyone, unlike the others. Noah suggested that Emily had been terrified that they, too, were among those who had circulated her photo. Lewis admitted that he'd gotten the file with that photo first, but he hadn't intended to open it, because it wasn't in his nature to do so. Noah was surprised to ask if his colleague was being honest with him. He replied that he was telling the truth. Noah noted that Lewis seemed to be actually better than he might seem at first glance. It's really empty today, just a few sympathizers, relatives, and an old woman, Lewis remarked. Noah agreed that he too had never seen a more ridiculous death and such pitiful people. But the truth is, the young go early. Lewis suddenly remarked aloud that if the old lady found out about that intimate photo spread throughout the company, she'd go crazy. Then he said he could just give her more money. Noah agreed with his comrade. Oh, what's wrong? Why did Noah's face suddenly twist? He noticed the old lady. Grandma was standing at the door, and it looked like she had managed to hear everything the men were saying. What does it all mean? She asked, clinging to the wall. Tears ran from the old woman's eyes down her wrinkled cheeks. God, was her girl's death not an accident? The two began to ludicrously twist around, motioning for the grandmother to sit down so that they could explain everything to her. The old lady repeated her poor Emily's name in despair. Is it suicide? She asked, grasping the sleeve of one of the men's jacket. The men glanced at each other. They had already regretted 1,000 times that they had started this conversation, and now they had to think hard before answering. The unhappy grandmother shuddered with sobs. Her poor child. Without stopping crying, the old woman walked over to Emily's picture and fell on her knees right in front of it. Jane and Nancy were just coming back. I think they heard the old lady's voice. They both hurried back to the funeral parlor. Grandma? God, what had happened to her? Jane was dumbfounded by what she saw. It was unclear what had happened here. Miss Nancy looked suspiciously at her colleagues. They explained that the grandmother had heard them talking about the cause of Emily's death. Meanwhile, Jane couldn't listen to the older woman crying. She would never be able to forget that old woman's sobs in her life. As Jane stood looking at her grandmother, Nancy came up behind her. She stood silent for a short time, then told the boys they could go home first. Funeral wreaths were everywhere, making the atmosphere in the halls more mournful. An old lady kneeling down hugged Emily's portrait, holding it to her chest. Jane also fell to her knees in front of her grandmother. The girl lowered her gaze, bowing her head, and not knowing what words could comfort an elderly woman in such grief. The grandmother had suffered her child to suffer hopeless despair until death. She cried helplessly, saying that a grandmother like him, not knowing everything, could do nothing but just sit there and cry. The old lady berated herself for not coming to see him when Emily called and said she missed him. Grandma thought it was herself who needed to die, not this young girl whose life was just beginning. A hopeless sadness from which there was no escape. Every moment spent by her grandmother's side brought regret and sadness. Jane rose from her knees and in a confident voice declared for her grandmother to confide in her, as Jane would never forgive those who were involved in Emily's death. They would definitely pay. There was no way Grandma was leaving the funeral parlor, especially now that she knew more than she needed to. But sooner or later, her tears would dry up too. 2 hours later, Jane finally walked out of the funeral hall. On the way out of the hall, Nancy was sitting on a bench near the door. It seemed she was the one waiting for Jane. Jane noticed Nancy and wondered why she was still here. Nancy stood up. She noted aloud that Emily was not as strong as she thought she was. Would Jane be able to handle the truth that Nancy wanted to tell her? The girl said she could take it. Do you think Emily is the only victim? No, it's just that she's the only one who couldn't face it and took such a drastic step. With those words, Nancy lowered her sad gaze. Jane looked at the girl questioningly. Nancy clenched her fists and admitted that she herself had been one of the first victims. God, what was she saying now? Jane couldn't believe her words were true. Could it be that this strong-looking woman, too, could have been a victim of someone's cruel and cynical schemes? Yes, perhaps we should tell the story of Nancy Freeman, which happened exactly 7 years ago. At that time, the girl was going to get a job by referral from the school or through an agency. Her chances were 1 in 100. Coming to the interview at the Van Group, Nancy realized that to get here, she had to somehow stand out from the crowd. Wow, she did her best, and she was hired by the company. Nancy believed that in this company everything is fair, and it is a great springboard for achieving goals. Therefore, in the beginning, the girl was determined. Only after a certain amount of time, Nancy realized one truth. Although this place seemed to be one of the best, it was actually mired in darkness. Nancy had been used. Her project had been assigned to someone else without even giving the girl's name. The supervisor was a self-righteous boor. He lectured Nancy, trying to re-educate her to suit himself. Nancy had to follow his rules against her sense of dignity. It wasn't easy working for this company. Colleagues discussed Nancy. They judged her and didn't understand why she worked so hard. Many thought that the girl wanted a promotion so badly that she would do anything for it. Colleagues envied Nancy, making her the object of their gossip and gossip. Nancy, in spite of everyone, did not take her head off work, trying to prove something first of all to herself. However, plunged headlong into work, the girl lost sight of the local laws of survival. Nancy lost her guard. Her fatal mistake was that despite everything, she tried to fight the established system and move forward. Were all her problems because she refused to go with the flow? Was it because Nancy had decided to choose herself? The girl had no answer to that question. It was at that moment when Nancy found herself at the bottom of her life that she made her fateful choice. She grasped for a helping hand, not knowing how wrong a decision made in supposed hopelessness can be. Company director Cody Faber began making more frequent inspections of the department where Nancy worked. So often, in fact, that the female employees were already starting to make fun of him, suspecting he was going there on purpose to see someone. They were right. At the hotel. In one of the hotel rooms, Nancy is lying on the bed. The director sits next to her and informs her that he has a gift for the girl. He bought a very expensive watch especially for her. Was Nancy the person he was arranging all those inspections to meet? Then Nancy said she couldn't accept such an expensive gift. She thought that she should not spend money so thoughtlessly because it is earned by labor, not grow on trees. Cody Faber confessed to the girl that he loved her so much that he couldn't remember himself. He thought about talking to Nancy's boss about transferring her to his department. At the time, Nancy naively believed that her and Cody's love was the medicine that could heal all their wounds. That was until that fateful text message. Cody was just taking a shower in his hotel room. Unsuspecting, Nancy calmly walked over to his phone. It was okay if she just looked. Maybe there was something important on there. Now she'll see what he's been sent. Maybe it's an important work email? The girl looked at the phone, puzzled. She picked it up and froze for a moment. The phone was locked. However, the initial text of the message was visible on top of the lock screen, and her name was there. What was the meaning of all this? Nancy didn't know the password to unlock the phone, much less her fingerprint. So she decided to randomly type in some numbers that were meaningful to Cody. As she typed in the passcode, Nancy somehow remembered that she and Cody had once talked about the license plate number of his car. The principal had said it was his lucky number, and he had spent a lot of money on it. In addition to that, the combination of numbers of that license plate number was easy to memorize. That's why Nancy decided to use those particular numbers. Nancy already had a bad feeling about it. She unlocked her phone and logged into her email account. Oh my God, there was a picture of her in the message. It was Nancy in the photo, and she was without clothes. Someone wrote that they had received the photo and payment would be discussed after the 15th. And there, to Nancy's horror, was more than one photo of her naked body. There was also a video, uncensored, of her making love to Cody. There was also a caption. "This is material to be published in May, top shelf merchandise. A girl with a short haircut." Ah, what on earth did it all mean? Nancy couldn't believe her eyes in horror. God, was she really only a girl with a short haircut to him? At that time, Cody came out of the shower and walked over to the girl. He put his arm around Nancy and asked what had happened so far that she was all in tears. Nancy pushed the man away hysterically. The man couldn't understand what was the matter or what was going on. Nancy's world collapsed in an instant. That mailbox of publications called Food of the Gods turned out to belong to an organization within the company. After pictures and videos of the girls came into that mailbox, they were immediately sold to a VIP group. Nancy went into great detail about all of this to Jane at the funeral home. Jane was shocked by the whole story. As she was leaving the building, Nancy added that what's more, every month he was sent a letter of settlement for confirmation. Every month he received money for selling Nancy's pictures. But Nancy was most disappointed when Cody sold almost a couple $1,000s worth of photos and immediately started sending complaints to his friends. He said he was pissed off that fewer people were buying the photos. This led him to the conclusion that Nancy was already boring everyone. "Haha, $1,700. Nancy smiled for some reason. Then she added that to the Food of the Gods, they were just a commodity, just food on which they were allowed to parasitize. That's when Nancy learned that the company had a private group that traded girls. To get membership in that group, you first had to send in a certain number of photos and videos. All the material in the group was paid for, and most of the victims were women who worked for the Van group. Jane wondered aloud why Nancy hadn't opposed it then. "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" Nancy answered question for question. Jane had nothing to say to that. Nancy asked her not to look at her like that, for Jane could not know what she was facing. "Did I do wrong in choosing my own defense?" she asked reproachfully. She didn't understand why it was necessary to sacrifice her cause, which had been so hard for her, for the sake of others. "Is lying dead in the ground an opposition, and living a crime?" asked Nancy weepingly. Nancy herself was a victim, but just because she didn't choose the path of confrontation didn't mean it was her fault. Nancy said she had to struggle to make herself live. Meanwhile, they were already standing outside. The weather was overcast as it was, and now it had started to rain as well. Tears were running down Nancy's cheeks along with the raindrops. Suddenly, Jane gave Nancy a hug. This was unexpected by the supervisor, however. She did not reject her. Jane was very grateful that Nancy had agreed to tell her everything. It was very difficult for Jane to imagine all that Nancy had been through. How had she single-handedly made it through that oppressive darkness? How had she been able to withstand the shame and disgrace that someone she trusted had involved her in? How had that fragile girl managed to withstand all those perverted stares? To choose her own life was no mistake. Jane realized it particularly clearly just now. Hugging Nancy, she didn't judge her. "I can help, but I'll only do it for me," Nancy offered. "Oh, there's Ryan Hausgaard again." With a confident gait, he strides down the hallway. Looks like Jane led Nancy to Ryan Howe's place. When asked by Nancy what the next plan would be, Jane waves her hand at the guard, explaining that he is someone who will help them with their case. Nancy nodded, puzzled. Looking at the guard's imposing appearance, she mused aloud that he appeared to be someone she could rely on. Suddenly, Ryan Howe jumped in front of the guard, indignantly stating that Jane was talking about him, not his bodyguard, and that he was the one who would be helping them. Nancy stared at the two men in bewilderment. Jane confirmed that she was indeed talking about Ryan Howe. Yeah, that trio looked funny together. Stagecoach, idol, mobster, how did they end up together? Nancy drilled them with her gaze, wondering if she should trust these three. Jane asked Nancy to recount again everything she had already told her earlier. The supervisor sighed and agreed. Nancy had heard that the van group had a special chat room, like a membership club. She knew that there were about 300 people in this chat room. It is difficult to join the group. The selection criteria are strict, and users protect each other. First, you have to post a certain number of photos and videos. In addition, all members of the group are anonymous. From what Nancy knew, photos and videos can't be forwarded elsewhere. That's one of the rules. However, Nancy's point was that the rule about not sharing content is not to protect victims. For participants, victims' personal information is an asset. They are so arrogant that they would never allow an outsider to access the information for free. Funny how a bunch of disgusting people who think they are above the rest have created an entire scheme. Jane noted that from what Nancy said, it appeared that explicit photos of Emily had also been posted in the group. Then how did they become the cause of gossip among the company's employees? What kind of glitch had occurred in their circuitry? Nancy thoughtfully suggested that maybe the girl had just crossed someone's path. Jane and the devil Ryan Howe stood pensive. Each was trying to put together the information they had received and decide what to do about it now. Do you still remember the address of that post office? Ryan Howe inquired of Nancy. There was no use in memorizing. They change addresses all the time, and the mail she'd discovered back then had already been deleted. But Nancy had a memory card that they had set up in the women's restroom. Jane wondered if Nancy had checked what was on it, in case there was someone in the video who had installed it. Nancy replied that she hadn't looked. She initially wanted to forget about the whole thing altogether. Ryan Howe asked where she hid the card in that case. Nancy said that she kept it in her office. Jane asked her to give them the memory card since there was definitely evidence on it. Nancy promised to bring them the card. But letting Nancy go alone was dangerous and very risky. So the bodyguard assumed it was finally his time. Mission accomplished. So they arrived at the office. Nancy left the guard in the hallway, telling him to wait for her here, and promised to be back in a couple minutes. The guard obediently stood guard. Nancy entered the office and hurriedly started looking for what she had come for. Oh, she finally found it. Luckily, the map was in place. Nancy taped it to the bottom of her mug. So that's where it was, came a sudden voice behind her back. Oh no, Nancy shuddered with fear. Who are you? Who let you in? The girl asked dazedly. The man insolently emphasized that he didn't need anyone's permission in this building. Nancy was puzzled. Her eyes widened with surprise. The girl tried to piece together her thoughts to figure out who this man was and how he was here. Even more, she didn't understand what she should do now. The guard stood there for a little longer than a couple minutes. Sensing something amiss, he decided to knock on Nancy's office. Miss, you said it would only take 2 minutes. Is everything okay? The guard knocked, but no one responded to his knock or words. The guard opened the door. He called out for Nancy, however the office was empty. That was very strange. Meanwhile, Nancy and Ryan Howe sat tensely staring at the phones waiting for a call. Finally, one of the phones rang. Jane determined that it was a call for her and jumped up, startling Ryan with that reaction. Jane picked up the phone and wondered who was calling her. She was being hassled by the Human Resources Department to inform her that there would be some changes in Jane's job. She was then notified that the company had approved Jane for the position of Ryan Howe's representative. Details were offered to discuss next week if the girl had time. Jane agreed to the offer to see her next week and looked suspiciously at the devil sitting next to her. Her eyes seemed to ask if it was his doing. Ryan Howe looked innocent, as if he had absolutely nothing to do with it. Suddenly, the devil's phone rang as well. Oh, it's the bodyguard. We need to take the call right away. Ryan Howe listened to the guard. His look was very worried. Jane, in turn, began to worry about what might have already happened. Nancy is missing, Ryan reported, looking at Jane. Jane didn't understand how that was even possible. Moments later, they were already in a cab, begging the driver to push on. Jane was very excited. Ryan suddenly asked if Nancy could have changed her mind about helping and just run away. Jane was sure that if Nancy had changed her mind, she would have said so outright. The only thing the girl feared was that Nancy could have met the same fate as Jane had when she had been attacked by the masked stranger. Jane tried to banish the intrusive thoughts, reassuring herself that Nancy must be all right. Finally, they arrived at the office. The security guard was glad to see them arrive. Jane asked on the fly what had happened after all. The guard told everything as it happened. After they arrived at the office, Miss Nancy decided to go to the office herself to pick up the card, and he waited for her outside the door. She didn't come out after 5 minutes, so the guard decided to check. But it was as if Nancy had vanished into thin air. What do you mean, vanished into thin air? Devil Ryan Howe tensed up at those words. He checked with the guard to see if he had gone anywhere, but the bodyguard assured that he was always there. Ryan Howe decided to go himself to check things out. Jane tried to stop the devil, reminding him that he wasn't fully recovered yet after all. "Now is the time to show off my devil power. How can I miss a chance like this?" he replied, smiling. The girl only had to wait patiently behind the closed door. Devil Ryan Howe stood in the empty office for some time. "Where on earth have you gone, Nancy?" Mentally, the devil searched for an answer to that question. He lifted his head and sucked in a breath of air. A prolonged moan escaped his lips. The devil's eyes turned red. Ryan Howe was testing his power. With his power, he saw that Nancy was here. She was saying something, but the devil couldn't make out what exactly. But why couldn't he hear what she was saying? That really puzzled the devil. He noted that there was clearly no one else here, so who could Nancy be talking to? Now that's very interesting. Suddenly, the devil's hand turned black, as if it had been burned. A distinctive hissing sound was heard. The devil looked at Nancy. She screamed in terror. Devil was even more confused. What could all this mean? His hand slid on the doorknob. Jane was eager to hear the news, so immediately the first thing she did was ask the devil if he had found out where Nancy was. Devil Ryan Howe chagrinedly noted that he hadn't found out anything. Jane didn't understand why he couldn't find out anything. But the devil explained that he had a feeling that there was some kind of barrier, and his power was useless inside this room. The devil suggested aloud that things seemed to have gotten more complicated from here on out. And now he was bound to find whoever was in their way. The elevator opened and 2 men stepped out. One of them was carrying someone in a wheelchair. The man in the business suit dialed the code to the door of the private clinic. The girls at the reception desk of the private clinic bowed to their guests. The man in the business suit asked to prepare a room for the newly arrived VIP client. "Okay, we'll get everything ready for the VIP client now," the receptionist dutifully agreed. The nurse leaned over to the wheelchair. "Please follow me," she invited whoever was sitting in that wheelchair. My God, it was Nancy, wasn't it? But what was it that had happened to her, and who were the 2 men who had brought her to the clinic? It was the 2nd day since Nancy had disappeared from the office. Now she was lying in the clinic for some unknown reason. The nurses were wiping her arms and legs with something. A tune was coming from somewhere. A radio was playing in the room. The nurses began to discuss the VIP client who had been admitted to their clinic yesterday. One of them noted that yesterday, after this client had woken up, she had been saying some strange things non-stop. The second sister looked around cautiously. She then inquired what that girl was talking about after all. The first nurse replied that her words were about some devil, that demons existed, and that they should go to the police. The second one, on the other hand, commented that all of their VIP clients were a little crazy. However, it was still strange to the first SIS that they were all talking about something like that. Besides, all the clients in their clinic were women. The second nurse put her finger to her lips and hinted to the first nurse to be careful with her words here. Suddenly, their conversation was suddenly interrupted. Some woman entered, and both nurses apologized and bowed to her. The woman asked how long they had been working here. One replied that she had been working here for a year, the other only 2 months. The woman sternly reminded her that the first rule of their clinic, no discussing VIP clients, it is forbidden. It is also forbidden to eavesdrop, ask questions, and interfere. The girls began to apologize and promised that this would not happen again. The woman asked them if they had ever wondered why their salaries were so much higher in this clinic than in other similar clinics. She then warned them that if they were caught doing something like this again, they would be out of here immediately. This woman had the right to speak to them in such a tone because she is the head nurse. Therefore, there was nothing left for the girls, Esther and Millie, but to apologize once again and thank her for the second chance. After reprimanding her subordinates, the head nurse left. Meanwhile, Jane was standing outside someone's apartment. "Ah, this is Emily's house, isn't it?" The girl looked sadly at the keys with the cute fobs. After Emily was gone, Jane could not dare to cross the threshold of her house. Ah, so many of their shared memories here. As Jane looked around the room, her thoughts traveled back in time. Once upon a time, in the kitchen of this very house, she and Emily had discussed what kind of guys might like them. How fun and carefree they had been, talking and laughing without fear of the future. Jane remembered watching movies together, and how Emily could cry at any point in a movie where there wasn't even a reason to cry. Ah, she was so sensitive and vulnerable. She and Emily could talk for hours in bed about anything in the world, swapping dreams of the future with each other. Jane dreamed of settling down in this city and buying her own apartment, and Emily would live across the wall from her. The girls dreamed of earning a lot of money so that there would be an opportunity to realize the rest of their dreams. One day, Jane wanted to have a serious talk. There was one point that was very disturbing to the girl. Jane wanted to tell her friend that her boyfriend didn't seem to be as good as she thought. However, Emily had fallen asleep then, and Jane never shared her worries about it. Distracted from her memories, Jane texted Ryan Howe. "I went to Emily's apartment today to see if I could see any leads. Ryan Howe, Nancy's whereabouts are on you." "Okay, there's nothing I can't break," replied the devil. He then sent her some kind of photo. Jane hadn't had time to respond to anything yet, when Ryan Howe sent her a message again, writing that he was forbidding her to read the messages and not respond to them. "Got it," the girl wrote back to him, smiling. Jane looked around. She then walked over to a shelf of books. Jane reached for one book, trying to reach for it, as suddenly some paper fell out of there. Jane picked it up and was surprised to find that it was the instructions for birth control pills. God, what was that for? The girl went to the bathroom and started searching the bathroom cabinet. Then she went through all of her friends' things. Jane hoped that even if someone had cleaned up the place, they might have missed something, like the footprints that had been left earlier. The time was already beginning to draw nearer to evening. The scarlet sunset was casting a pleasant light on the window in Emily's room. Jane suddenly dialed Adam's number. Her unexpected call really surprised the guy. He asked what was wrong. Jane was going to discuss something with him, so she asked if he was free right now. Adam was free, and inquired where Jane was now. Jane replied that she was at Emily's house, and they could meet here. At the moment, Jane was looking at a cufflink that was on the table right in front of her. Adam replied that he understood and asked her to send him the address so he could drive up. "Emily, if that cufflink belongs to Adam, I promise LOL he won't leave me. No way!" Jane pledged aloud. Meanwhile, Adam, after Jane's call, was on his way to see her. He was not alone in the hotel room. There was a girl in bed, and she was curious to know where Adam was going. He replied that he was traveling on business and wouldn't be back today, so the girl needed to remember to turn in her room in the morning. Adam asked her to be a good girl and wait for his call. However, the girl was still bothered by the look on Adam's face. She wondered if he had something serious wrong. Adam was indeed worried about something. The cause of his concern was clearly Jane's call. "Maybe," he answered the girl briefly and headed for the exit. The underground parking lot of the car lot. Adam arrived at his destination. He looked at his cell phone. Jane, meanwhile, was sitting with a security guard in the CCTV room. Jane, what are you up to now?" Suddenly, Jane's phone rang. It was Adam. "Young lady, so what do you want me to help with?" the guard asked, puzzled. Jane put her finger to her lips, signaling him to be quiet, and picked up the phone. On the phone, Adam reported that he was already in the underground parking lot. The guy asked for the block number and Emily's apartment number. "Oh, you're already there. Block 3, 403rd apartment. You can take the elevator right from the parking lot," Jane replied. Jane hung up the phone and turned to the security guard, asking if he had seen the man. At the same time as asking, she jabbed her finger at one of the surveillance monitors. That monitor was broadcasting the footage from a camera that had been installed right where Adam had parked. He had just gotten out of the car now and was heading to the address Jane had given him. The security guard stated that he hadn't seen him before. Jane asked him to take a closer look. She needed to know for sure if the man had been here before. The guard said with a nonchalant face that he was sure, because he knew all the tenants in their compound. Jane was very upset. She seemed to be at an information dead end. The guard suddenly suggested that she ask the night guard. After all, he was on duty after 12 at night. and this guard could not speak for his partner as well, whether he had met this man. Jane perked up and asked where she could find his partner. "Find who?" the older man interjected as he entered the security room. As it turned out, he was the very partner Jane wanted to see. The guard addressed his partner. "Uncle Lewis, this girl needs your help." Lewis Dodson put on his glasses and looked into the monitor at Adam. "Well, do you recognize him?" Jane inquired hopefully. Adam was now already in the elevator, and the camera was showing him from the back. Lewis Dodson remarked that he would have to look at his face to see if he had seen him before. Adam, meanwhile, walked to the door of Emily's apartment. He rang the doorbell several times, but no one opened it for him. What was the oddity? The guy was surprised that Jane had called him herself, but apparently she wasn't home. Jane suddenly peeked out from around the corner, apologizing for keeping Adam waiting. He wondered aloud why Jane was out of there. "Going out somewhere?" Adam inquired. Jane left that question unanswered and simply opened the door to the apartment. Suddenly, Lewis Dodson walked up to them. He looked intently at Adam. "Ah, indeed. You're Miss Emily's boyfriend, aren't you? Haven't seen you around for a while," the old man remarked. Jane became very tense at his words, but she was not allowed to show any sign of it. Adam replied that the old man was mistaken. Jane smiled naively and said that Adam was her friend, and the old man had just mistaken him for someone else. Adam was troubled, his eyes running. Jane informed the guard Lewis that he could stay no longer, as they had more business to attend to here. The old man agreed and said that he had to go, and he did seem to be mistaken. Mentally, he noted that this was all very strange, for Jane had asked him to come out and identify the boy. It was definitely him. Adam thought about Jane acting very strangely. Jane remembered out loud that she needed to give Adam something. "What is it?" Adam asked, and the girl held out her hand to him. On it lay a cufflink. Adam laughed. He assured the girl that it wasn't his cufflink, and Jane was obviously confused about something. "Ah, so it is a cufflink. If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known," Jane said with a silly look on her face. "Ha ha, it's just a cufflink. How could you not know that?" Adam marveled. "Should I help pack some things? We need to get a quick start. I still have things to do, so I want to be free early." Adam hurried on. In a menacing tone, Jane stated that he wasn't leaving here anytime soon. What was she talking about? Adam looked at her in bewilderment. "Devil Ryan Howe, show up," Jane pronounced. "Hey Jane, what are you talking about anyway?" Adam asked, smiling incredulously. "Hello? Where did you get the nerve to address her as hey?" A voice suddenly sounded behind Adam's back. God, Adam's hair stood up and nearly had a heart attack from fear. The devil was standing behind him and looking at him with his red eyes. The boy began to stutter. Ignoring the frightened Adam, the devil asked Jane why she had called him in. He was actually very busy doing a one-man search instead of her. Jane emphasized that there were more urgent matters. Taking one look at Adam, Devil Ryan Howe smiled slyly and asked, "Do you really want me to deal with him?" Adam backed away, screaming in horror at what they were doing. Jane asked him a counter-question. She was the one who really wanted to know what he had done. Grinning foolishly, the boy declared that he didn't know what Jane was talking about. "Help me, Ryan Howe. No matter what way, just shake the truth out of him," Jane pleaded with the devil. She also added that she is willing to pay any price for it. The devil's hands turned from human hands into huge paws with claws. Adam, with wild cries, tried to run, pushing Jane out of the way. At the sight of such a monster, his heart literally ran away at his heels. He didn't know that there was no escape from the devil. Devil Ryan Howe was beside Adam in a second and penetrated his hand through his body, taking his claws right over his heart. "Did I give you permission to leave?" he asked calmly. Adam screamed and cried out for help. His heart pounded in terror, giving off a frantic pounding in his temples. Jane looked at the boy without a shred of pity. She wanted Adam to pay for his sins right here in this room, in this very place, that would never again be filled with laughter and joyful voices. The devil Ryan Howe had gotten right to Adam's heart. He tried to reassure the screaming guy in a level tone that he wasn't going to die. All the devil needed was a little lever to keep his brain under control. At the same time, in another place, a man and a woman came as close as possible to each other for a passionate kiss. The man suddenly stopped, and without letting the kiss happen, looked his woman straight in the eyes. "What's wrong? Why did you stop?" she asked. "It's okay, let's keep going," he replied, quietly smiling. Meanwhile, Devil Ryan, who was holding Adam's heart with one hand, held out his other hand to Jane with the words, "Give me your hand, I'll show you something." The girl grasped the devil's hand without a second thought. Her eyes turned red. The devil showed her pictures from her past. First, Jane saw a scene where Emily was introducing her older co-worker Adam to her. It was their first introduction. At the time, Adam thought about Jane looking pretty good. Upon meeting her, Adam concluded that Jane would probably be hard to get, for a certain coldness was clearly read in her. Then the devil showed another picture from the past. There, Adam decided to look at Emily. He saw in the girl sympathy towards himself, so he decided to start with her, thinking that she would be easy. In the next picture, the devil showed Emily urging Adam not to hide in corners, because there were other couples in the company, and there was nothing wrong with that. Adam pointed out that they were different from the other couples. He was just in the process of being promoted, and he didn't want the chief to find out about his relationship at a time like this. Adam was afraid that the chief would think it was as if he wasn't seeking a promotion, but was into something else. Emily was hurt, but she silently and sympathetically accepted his position. It was raining and it was late evening. Someone knocked on Adam's apartment. The guy was surprised that someone had come in so late. It was Emily. Adam was not happy about her arrival and rebuked the girl with the fact that they had agreed to meet her only at Emily's house. The guy was annoyed that the girl had disobeyed him. Emily, in tears, showed Adam a photo on her phone. The photo was of her in the nude. She was now furious, asking if he had sent out that photo to everyone. Adam calmly asked where Emily had gotten it from. The girl yelled that she had been told that it could be downloaded from one group for a fee. Emily repeated her question again. She was sure it was Adam who had sent out her photo to everyone. Someone's voice from the apartment asked Adam who was there coming in so late. The guy said aloud, unashamedly, "It's a shame she showed up today. It's annoying." It seemed like the whole world collapsed inside Emily at that moment. Adam then looked the girl straight in the eye and asked her to just get over it. He told her that she wasn't the only one being covertly filmed at the company. "Do you have to be here looking like this?" he asked, giving Emily a dismissive look. The unhappy girl had no words to express her feelings. Adam, however, calmly took her by the shoulders and told her that they needed to part ways. He added that he was very busy right now, and if Emily wanted to talk, they could do so tomorrow. Emily walked away from him, confused and angry. Adam tried to catch up with her to talk things over again. However, the girl said that they had nothing to talk about. She threatened that she would uncover all of their schemes and make it all public. Adam yelled that she was crazy, she had no proof, and no one would believe her. He asked if Emily knew who was behind it all. In his opinion, she could accomplish nothing but put herself in mortal danger. Emily replied that she wanted to die anyway. Adam said that Emily shouldn't blame him for that. The girl was in so much pain that she couldn't hear his words. That night, security guard Lewis became an unwitting witness to Emily and Adam's altercation. Sometime later, Adam was standing in front of an unknown man who asked him to quiet Emily down a bit, to get her to shut her mouth. Adam was at a loss. But his interlocutor revealed that all it would take was the push of a button on his phone, and Emily's picture would be in every corner of this company. Adam couldn't make up his mind to take this terrible step for a while. The unidentified man prodded him, telling him that Adam didn't have enough courage to let go of the one he'd slept with. It worked, and Adam snatched up his phone to prove he had enough courage for the deed. The decision was made. The deed was done. The interlocutor hinted that Adam now had prospects. It meant that his supposed promotion was just around the corner. Sitting in his office, Adam didn't seem to repent for what he had done. What's more, he decided to just finish Emily off morally. He sent the girl a text message that read, "Die." He was pleased with himself. A hero who stomped out one innocent victim. The devil Ryan Howe decided that was probably the end of the story. He let go of Adam's heart and pulled his hand out of it. "What have you done to me, demon?" With those words, Adam fell to the floor like a soft-bodied doll. "That's all, Jane." The devil looked at Adam and turned to the girl. Jane was sobbing. Her eyes were red, but no longer from the devil's charms, but from tears and rage. "Who is he?" she screamed with hatred. Adam was undeniably responsible for Emily's death. However, there were so many dark spots in this story. There were still those who had pushed this situation with Jane's friend to this finale. On the chair, sipping alcohol from a glass, sat that mysterious stranger with gold earrings in both ears. "Truly, a good fairy tale has no end," he said, smiling. Ah, there it was again. Devil Ryan Howe was puzzled that he had once again failed to see that mysterious man's face. Who the hell was he? Why aren't the devil's powers working on him? Meanwhile, Jane rushed to Adam, lying on the floor, interrogating him. She demanded that he immediately tell her who had encouraged him to send out the photos of Emily. Adam replied that he didn't know. "How can you not know? Tell me!" Jane shouted in a rage, rubbing the boy by his jacket. Adam covered his head with his hands and admitted that all he knew was that he was helping to deal with leaked files from the group. He was also known for being able to straighten out any case within the company. "It's like he's our guardian angel," the guy added fearfully, looking at Jane. Those words felt like an electric shock to the devil's hearing. His eyes turned fiery red again. "Ha!" he said, "guardian angel, wow. Where can I meet him?" the devil asked, leaning over to Adam. The latter wasn't particularly in the know, but he was aware that the man was usually always present on the day of the annual press conference. Devil Ryan Howe touched a finger to Adam's forehead. Devil noted that the guy wasn't lying. Jane asked what it was that Ryan was doing. Devil replied that he had to erase his memories of that day, since he didn't want Adam to blab about it. After a while, Adam fell into a sound sleep. Jane said that they just had to wait for the press conference, and then she couldn't finish her sentence. The devil turned and looked at the girl, puzzled. Tears were ringing on the floor, falling from the girl's eyes. Devil Ryan Howe approached Jane and carefully wiped her tears away. "Don't cry," he soothed the girl. The devil reassured Jane that she had done all she could. It was Adam's fault that Emily had been driven to suicide. All they had to do was figure out how to punish him. Jane wasn't okay with only exposing him. That chat room, all those people covered in darkness who turned women into commodities, they were all in on it. To expose those people was Jane's main desire right now, and in the time remaining, she would like to fulfill it. The devil asked if the girl was worried that she herself might die. Jane answered that she was worried, and she was certainly scared. Except that she had no right to back down. With these thoughts, the girl leaned her head against the devil's chest. She was comforted by the thought that she and Emily would be able to meet after death. Then she could finally look her friend in the eye with a clear conscience, and tell her that she'd dealt with everyone who'd tormented her, just like Emily had helped her once as a child. "You're tired," the devil noted quietly, leaning his hand against the girl's forehead. He wanted to make the girl at least get some rest from everything that had been going on in her life lately. As soon as he touched her hand, Jane immediately fell asleep. The devil looked slyly toward Adam lying on the floor. "As for you, prepare to take your punishment." Those words were addressed to the boy. A girl with long dark hair sat on the bed by the same mysterious man. He sat there and just stared out the window. The girl quietly got up from the bed and walked towards the man. "What are you thinking? You woke up and didn't even say a word to me," she said, going to the man from behind and hugging him around the neck. At that moment, the phone rang. The man took the phone in his hands and, without turning to the girl, said that it was time to leave. The girl agreed and asked him to call if he missed her. The girl went to the closet to get dressed. She could hear the man telling someone that he asked them not to call him after hours. "Once you've figured it out, why call? What's wrong with that person?" he asked. The girl overheard that he had arranged to meet someone at the old place. The man was starting to get nervous. "How many times do I have to tell you? Stay out of it. Solving problems is my concern. What makes you decide to take it all on yourself?" he said irritably, and added that there was no need to teach him anymore. The girl tried to take longer to get dressed so she wouldn't miss anything from their conversation. She was going to overhear everything from beginning to end. The man, however, was vigilant. He saw the girl's reflection in the facets of his glass and asked his companion to wait while he dealt with something. He mused aloud that one naughty little man had been eavesdropping on their conversation all this time. The girl smiled and apologized, making the excuse that her dress was a bit tight and it took longer to get it on. "Shall I go?" the girl asked timidly. The man loomed over her like a gloomy shadow, saying there was nothing that could be done, but he was too angry right now. So the girl had only her tragic fate to blame. The girl's eyes suddenly widened in surprise. In the reflection of her eyes, one could see how the man opposite suddenly had wings. Meanwhile, Jane was sleeping peacefully. Next to the bed on the bedside table, A candle was burning with a cozy yellow light. The girl seemed to be having a restless dream. She periodically made some inarticulate noises. Suddenly, with a cry of no, Jane jumped up sharply on the bed. God, she seemed to be having a nightmare. She looked around and was surprised to see that she was at Ryan Howe's house. When did he have time to bring her here? Wake up? Ryan asked as he entered the room. He was carrying a tray of food in one hand and smiling sweetly. Jane noticed it was getting dark. It looked like she had been asleep for a long time. The devil decided to tease the girl and said that while carrying her, he almost broke all his wings. Jane awkwardly apologized. The devil asked her to eat at least a little. With those words, he placed a tray of food on the side table. Jane absolutely couldn't think about food right now. She was very concerned about what the devil had done to Adam. The devil admitted that he had just left him there at Emily's house. This was not at all what the girl expected to hear. She indignantly asked the devil how he could have let him go. Ah, well, did he really just pick him up and leave him there? Jane screamed that Adam should at least be punished as the devil had promised. Ryan Howe tried to calm the girl down. He asked Jane to cool down and just listen to him carefully without interrupting. Ryan Howe reminded Jane that he was the devil after all. He assured her that there was no one who understood the essence of fear better than he did. Adam simply lay on the floor for a long time after the devil had left with Jane. He was either asleep or in oblivion. Eventually, he woke up. Scratching the back of his head, Adam still couldn't figure out where it was that he was. Why was he here? The boy's eyes ran desperately around the apartment. The way the devil had erased his memory, the guy was terrified that he had absolutely no idea how he had gotten to this place, and more importantly, why. Adam tried to get up. Suddenly, the lock on the front door clicked, and Emily entered the apartment. The boy screamed in terror like a deranged man. He was shaking with fear and couldn't utter a word properly. Adam scurried away, reassuring himself as he went that it was all a dream and not real. As he pressed the button on the elevator, he continued to console himself that he was just having a nightmare. After all, it couldn't be. That girl was long dead, smashed to bits. It was definitely just a dream. He rode the elevator away from the 4th floor, but arrived on the same 4th floor again. God, Adam was scared. The elevator door opened and Adam's face contorted in an eerie grimace. Impossible, he thought and fell to the floor. Emily and some guy were about to enter the elevator. The guy asked Adam if everything was okay, but the girl told him not to talk to him and to drive down faster. It wasn't until the elevator doors started to close that Adam saw that it wasn't Emily at all. Adam walked down the hallway and thought in rage that Jane had found similar people to Emily and was now playing with him, trying to drive him crazy. He vowed out loud to kill her for these shenanigans. Then he finally stepped out of the house and into the street. A woman's voice suddenly sounded behind him. It was Emily's voice. She was saying that there was no way she was going to let him leave. The next thing he knew, he felt like he was going crazy. Everywhere he looked, he saw Emily. He saw her face in every girl. It made him feel sick and creepy. A lot of people with Emily's face kept bothering Adam. Some offered to help, some noted his unhealthy complexion, and others said that Adam was strange and scary just by looking at him. In fact, Adam was scared shitless himself. He suddenly started laughing hysterically, claiming that none of this was real, that none of it was true. Adam leaned against the wall of the building and yelled for Jane to come out and stop playing with him already. There was no one down the street with a face like Emily's. All the people went about their business and looked at Adam like he was a psycho who had escaped from the asylum. Devil told Jane all of this, and she apologized to him and thanked him. Ryan Howe embarrassedly pointed out that there was no need to thank her, and proudly added that he was a pro at this sort of thing. The girl unbuttoned her blouse. Devil asked what she was doing, joking that he didn't accept payment in kind. Jane gave him her hands, explaining that she too should honor the terms of their mutual agreement. For the kind of help the devil had given the girl today, she allowed him to bite herself. Devil Ryan Howe stood in indecision. The girl hurried him to bite sooner to restore Ryan's strength. Ryan Howe reached out his hand to her and immediately froze. It seemed to him that the girl herself was now completely without strength. Jane wondered why he had stopped. The devil noted to himself that he had just felt sorry for Jane. Wait, but it shouldn't be like that. He had helped Jane, and now she was bound to pay back. Ryan Howe had never broken the rules for anyone in this world before. He thought about one thing, but he said aloud that this time the payment would be painful. Jane nodded readily. The devil Ryan Howe dug into the tender skin on the girl's neck. Ah, blood trickled down her neck. Jane felt pain and the devil felt pleasure.